let's look now at some vocal music from the classical period. One of the things that composers liked to do in this particular period of time was to take movements of the Mass, which we've been talking about since way back, and to write those more as concert pieces than as something that might be done in church. So what are they going to set? If you'll remember, the ordinary of the Mass were the movements that happened every day, the Gloria, Credo, Sanctus, those. So those are the movements that we would hear in a Mass that was written for performance, as opposed to just being for the church service. So we've got maybe 8 movements. Most of these Masses last maybe 20 to 30 minutes. They're not tremendously long. Limited amount of text, right? But unlike earlier Masses, where we have been focused entirely on using Gregorian chant as our melody, what composers are doing now is taking those texts that they have and putting entirely new melodies to them. So they're not at all recognizable as the chant, which is fine. The text is what's important, right? So we now have this new concert kind of version of the Mass, new melodies, orchestra. We use choirs because we can. We have soloists. And we're sort of following the model of opera and other dramatic kinds of events now, but we've now taken a very traditional text base for that and just made it a much more dramatic kind of work. So you will have aria-like elements in a Mass, and you would have chorus kinds of things in a Mass. So lots of different variety there. Mozart wrote several Masses, as did Haydn, and of course many other composers in the period as well. So we're going to listen to a couple of examples so you can get a sense of how these two composers are different. One of the big differences between Mozart and Haydn in terms of style is that Mozart tends to write melodies that are sort of flowing along and singable and just very nice melodies. Whereas Haydn tends to write melodies that are made up of what we call motives, so little repeated kinds of patterns. Let's take Beethoven's Fifth Symphony as an example of motive. So everybody knows da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. That's a motive. You wouldn't call that a melody, it's just a little short snippet. But in that case, Beethoven takes that one little snippet and makes this whole big piece about it. Haydn's is not quite that obvious that it's little motives, but he does tend to work with those kind of little building blocks of sound rather than a long thematic construction of sound, which is the way Mozart tends to work. So as you listen to these two different composers' approach to the Mass, then you can sort of try to see whether Mozart's really doing those long lines and Haydn's doing more of the little building blocks. So we'll listen to a couple of movements of just a regular Mass, and then I want you to listen to a movement from the Requiem Mass. So what's a Requiem Mass? A Requiem Mass is written to basically, we would think of it today as a funeral Mass, although it might also be used on the anniversary of somebody's death or for some sort of other significant date. So it's not necessarily the music that's performed at a funeral. It could be a commemorative kind of thing. So how is it different from a regular Mass? Well, in a regular Mass, there's a lot of glorification kind of stuff and a lot of happy kind of text. When we get to the Requiem Mass, that's probably not our biggest concern. This is a funeral Mass. We're not going to be doing all the most cheerful things that we can do. But we still incorporate a lot of the same movements that we had in a regular Mass. But we have one movement that only occurs in the Requiem, and it does not occur in any other Mass. That movement is called the Dies Irae, which means Day of Wrath. So you're thinking, why are we talking about days of wrath? Remember, we're kind of a hellfire and brimstone kind of approach going here. This is what's going to happen in the future days, the day of wrath and judgment. So that's part of the Requiem Mass that is not part of anything else. The Dies Irae chant tune is one that you have heard. If you have seen movies that are horror films, they use it all the time. It's a dum, 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 dum. That tune happens like in The Shining when Jack Nicholson, that's it. When Jack Nicholson, who's the bad guy, does things, they play this ominous theme. It happens in some other movie settings where we have something like that. They use it for trailers for movies all the time. It's big and dramatic, and everybody recognizes it. They may not know what it's about, but now you do. You know that it's about this day of anger and wrath, and you can see how that applies. That movement is particularly attractive to composers because, think about this text. You're supposed to be writing about anger. This is your chance to be really powerful about that. So we're going to kind of jump time frames here a little bit to give you some contrast. So I'm going to give you Mozart's version of the Dies Irae. So we're looking at it from a very classical, very reserved kind of approach to it, because Mozart's in a time period where we're not heavily emotional, pounding you in the face. And then I want you also to listen to a version of this same movement composed by Giuseppe Verdi, who lived in the 19th century, who is now in a time where people are very much into the emotional content of things, and he's just going to do something completely different from what Mozart does. So you're going to listen to some movements from just a regular mass by Haydn and Mozart, and then contrast Mozart's treatment of this highly charged text with Verdi's nearly 100 years later treatment of that same text, just to see how composers' idea of what you can do with a text changes over that next 100 years.